My name is David. I was sitting on the back deck of our suburban San Diego house, finishing off a cold beer as the evening breeze stirred the curtains hanging in the open windows. Inside, Kate was in the hallway, adjusting the light beige blouse tucked neatly into her dark slacks. She looked sharp, every bit the composed corporate professional, ready for what she described as an important meeting. She told me she had a late client dinner downtown and might stay at a nearby hotel since she had an early presentation the next morning. Her reasoning sounded logical, even practical. I offered to drive her, but she waved me off with an easy smile. After a decade of marriage, you learn when to let things slide. Still, as she walked out the door, something about her tone lingered in my mind, a faint edge I couldn't quite identify. Later that evening, while washing dishes, my phone buzzed with a message from Kate. "Just getting started," she'd written. "Hope your night's going well." Attached was a photo of a neatly set table, a bowl of pasta, a glass of red wine, and a napkin embossed with the name Belmont. I knew the place. It was a cozy, upscale restaurant just a 10-minute drive from home. Her claim about needing a hotel didn't quite align. Why stay overnight if the meeting was so close by? Trying to rationalize it, I figured maybe the meeting would run late, or it was easier for her to be close to the office. But the unease in my gut refused to settle. Around midnight, as I grabbed my phone charger from the garage, I noticed something out of place near the door, a black silk scarf. It wasn't Kate's. She wasn't the type to wear something so elegant, let alone in black. The fabric smelled faintly of expensive perfume mingled with a subtle, masculine undertone. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it belonged to a coworker or friend she'd given a ride to. The next morning, Kate breezed into the kitchen looking rested and polished, surprising for someone who'd supposedly spent the night at a hotel after a long meeting. I held up the scarf. "Is this yours?" I asked casually. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before smiling. "Oh, that must be Lauren's," she said lightly. "I gave her a ride yesterday. She must have left it in the car." Her response was smooth and confident, almost too confident. Lauren, as far as I knew, wasn't someone who wore anything like this. I nodded and let it drop, but my mind was spinning. That afternoon, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to stop by Belmont. The restaurant was as I remembered, quiet, classy, the kind of place where deals were sealed and secrets exchanged. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, taking in the scene. When the waitress came by, I pulled up a photo of Kate on my phone and asked if she'd been there recently. The waitress nodded. "Yeah, she was here last night," she said. "But she wasn't with a group. She was with a man. Older guy, dark suit. They sat right over there by the window." The words hit like a gut punch. I thanked her, left a generous tip, and walked out into the bright afternoon. My mind churned as the puzzle pieces began falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they formed. Kate wasn't careless. If she was hiding something, she was deliberate about it. But no one's perfect. A scarf here, a photo there. These were breadcrumbs, and I intended to follow them. When Kate came home that evening, she greeted me warmly, her charm intact. "How was your day?" she asked, smiling as she kissed my cheek. I studied her closely. The way she smiled, her posture, the brief flicker in her eyes when she avoided direct contact. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Kate was too good at thinking on her feet. I'd seen her handle tough negotiations at work with finesse. She could talk her way out of almost anything. If I wanted answers, I'd need to outmaneuver her. For now, I played the role of the oblivious husband while quietly connecting the dots. One thing was certain. I needed to find out who the man in the dark suit was. Ray, private investigator, laid out the plan with the precision of someone who had spent years navigating high-stakes operations. This time, though, I wasn't just an observer. I'd play an active role. Ray's logic was simple. No one in Mike's inner circle would suspect me. Mike is our best friends. I was the perfect insider. When he asked if I was ready, my answer was immediate. Whatever it took, I was in. The first step was subtle but effective. Ray had me send Mike a message, carefully worded to stir both curiosity and unease. "Mike, I've got a problem. Can we meet? Kate doesn't know." It was deliberately vague, but heavy with implications. Within minutes, Mike responded, suggesting we meet at a quiet cafe downtown. From a parked car across the street, Ray and I had a clear view of Mike. He showed up right on time, but his behavior was telling. His hands fidgeted on the table as he anxiously checked his phone. After a moment, he typed out a message and left in a hurry. Ray noted the number Mike had messaged. "He's not acting nervous for no reason," Ray muttered, his sharp gaze never leaving the screen. "He's reporting to someone." The next move was more direct. Ray handed me a folder, a carefully crafted collection of fake bank statements, fabricated transaction logs, and suspicious-looking documents that painted Kate in a questionable light. It was all convincing, the sort of thing that could make anyone think twice. "You're going to show this to Mike," Ray instructed. "Tell him you found it in Kate's things. Watch his reaction and see what he does next." We met at a dimly lit pub on the edge of town. I kept things casual at first, ordering beers and making small talk. When the moment felt right, I slid the folder across the table. "I found this in Kate's stuff," I said, my tone as calm as I could manage. "I need your help figuring out what it means." Mike's face turned pale as he flipped through the pages. His hands trembled slightly, and he avoided eye contact, staring hard at the papers. After a long pause, he finally spoke in a tight, low voice. "David, you don't understand. You shouldn't be looking into this." He hesitated, as though weighing his next words. "Kate must have forgotten to pass these along to someone important. If this falls into the wrong hands, it could be a disaster. Let me take care of it." "Trust me," said Mike. I nodded, feigning acceptance, while Mike shoved the folder into his bag, threw some cash on the table, and left without finishing his drink. Ray followed him at a distance, tracking Mike as he moved through the city. Eventually, Mike arrived at a run-down building on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, save for a flickering light above the door. Ray captured the moment Mike handed the folder to a hooded figure who disappeared into the shadows almost immediately. "Ray sent me the photos later that night. Whoever's behind this is careful," he said during our call. "This isn't amateur work. Mike isn't just involved out of loyalty, he's scared. And fear makes people sloppy." Things escalated quickly. Ray intercepted plans for a meeting between Mike and Kate at a large park downtown. The choice of location struck us as odd, too public, too exposed. But it was a chance we couldn't ignore. We arrived early. Ray set up a hidden camera, while I stayed in the car with binoculars. Kate showed up first, her posture stiff and her eyes darting around. Mike appeared a few minutes later, wearing his signature leather jacket and an expression that screamed tension. Their conversation started quietly, but quickly became heated. Through the binoculars, I saw Mike gesturing wildly, his frustration evident. His voice rose above the ambient noise, just enough for me to catch a snippet. "If David finds out, it's over. He'll never forgive you, and it'll blow back on all of us." I gripped the binoculars tightly. This wasn't about an affair or a simple misunderstanding. It was something much bigger. Ray's voice crackled through my earpiece. "We're getting into dangerous territory, David. Mike is panicking, and when people panic, they screw up. But we've got to be smart." Kate abruptly turned and walked away, leaving Mike sitting on a bench, his head in his hands. Moments later, he pulled out his phone, typing furiously. "He knows we're watching," Ray muttered. "He can feel it." I fought the urge to confront Mike then and there, but Ray stopped me. "Not yet. If you push now, we lose our only lead." That night, I met with Ray for what I knew would be the last time. I thanked him for everything, took all the evidence he'd gathered, and told him I needed to handle this myself from here on out. "Be careful, David," Ray said, his tone uncharacteristically somber. "You're walking into something bigger than you think." As I left his office, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about Kate anymore. I called two people I trusted implicitly, James and Liam. James was steady and methodical, a former Navy man who could keep his cool under pressure. Liam, on the other hand, was impulsive and fiery, the guy you wanted when you needed results fast. They didn't ask for details. All I said was, "It's about Kate, and it's serious." That was enough. Our focus shifted to Mike. For the next few days, we took turns shadowing him, but he was slippery, always on the move, never sticking to a pattern. However, One detail stood out. Every Wednesday, Mike stayed home. No meetings, no strange rendezvous. Just quiet. It was a crack in his armor, and we were ready to exploit it. We parked outside Mike's apartment building, the plan straightforward. Wait for him to step out, intercept him, and get answers. But, as had become his pattern, Mike surprised us. Instead of following his usual routine, he emerged cautiously, his eyes scanning the street as if he were expecting trouble. Moments later, he hopped into a waiting taxi. We followed, weaving through downtown traffic while trying to maintain a safe distance. The city was alive with the hum of the weekend, and keeping up wasn't easy. Eventually, we lost him. Liam slammed his fist against the dashboard, frustration etched on his face. "He's slippery," he muttered. James, calm as ever, nodded. "Everyone makes a mistake sooner or later. He's no different." That evening, I decided to set a different kind of trap. I sent a message to Mike in our group chat, keeping it casual. "Kate's out of town this weekend. Let's hang out, just like old times. Beers, laughs, the works." It felt natural, a message he wouldn't think twice about. A few hours later, Mike replied, "Sounds good. I'm in." The bait had been taken. The weekend arrived, and Kate left for her supposed work trip. James and Liam arrived at my house early to help set up. James stationed himself by the front door, calm and steady, while Liam lingered in the kitchen, gripping a heavy wrench, "Just in case," he'd said with a grim smile. Mike arrived at sunset, a bottle of whiskey in hand, and his usual confident smile on his face. But the second James locked the door behind him, and I stepped forward with a baseball bat in hand. The confidence drained from his expression. "Sit down, Mike," I said evenly. He hesitated, his eyes darting from me to James, then to Liam, who leaned casually against the counter. Finally, Mike obeyed, setting the whiskey on the coffee table and sinking into the couch. I didn't waste time. "Tell me what you know about Kate," I demanded. Mike tried to squirm his way out, offering half-truths and vague denials. But I wasn't playing games. I slammed the bat against the coffee table, splintering the wood. Mike jumped, his face pale and damp with sweat. Okay, he stammered. "I'll tell you everything." And then he did. Kate wasn't just involved in shady meetings or secretive rendezvous. According to Mike, she was selling information, sensitive, confidential information. But that wasn't the worst of it. She's sending photos, Mike said, his voice cracking. Videos. Personal stuff. Stuff no one should ever see. And she's keeping everything. All the records, all the files, somewhere in your house. I think it's in the attic." I stared at him, my knuckles white as my grip tightened around the bat. My mind raced, but my expression stayed cold and steady. I couldn't let him see how deeply his words cut. "If you tell her about this conversation," I said quietly, leaning in, "if you so much as breathe a word of it, I'll find you. And trust me, Mike, you won't like what happens." He nodded frantically, practically tripping over his feet as he bolted out the door. James and Liam didn't stop him. The house fell silent once he was gone. "You want us to stay?" James asked, his voice calm. I shook my head. "No, this is something I need to do alone." The attic felt stifling. Dust filled the air, clinging to every breath like sandpaper. My flashlight cut weak beams through the darkness, illuminating stacks of forgotten boxes and tangled Christmas lights. I worked methodically, pulling apart every corner, opening each box with shaking hands. Eventually, tucked behind a pile of stuffed animals and old holiday decorations, I saw it. A worn suede backpack. Its weight, when I picked it up, told me everything I needed to know. I hesitated for a moment before unzipping it, my hands trembling as the brass teeth gave way. Inside was a small leather diary, its cover worn smooth. On the first page, in Kate's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "My rules, my clients, my desires." My stomach churned as I read the entries. Each word was a hammer blow to my chest. Today I sent him new photos. He said I was perfect. He pays generously. Top 100 things that can fit inside me, from the mundane to the wild. Clients love it when I experiment. I skimmed further, my horror growing with each sentence. There was even a schedule. a grotesque inventory of tasks, items, and explicit acts. My name was there, scrawled at the bottom. A cruel afterthought in a twisted hierarchy. I dropped the diary, its pages fanning out across the floor. My chest tightened, nausea threatening to overwhelm me. After a moment, I forced myself to pick it up again, shoving it along with the other papers and photos into the backpack. This couldn't stay here. I drove to my lawyer's office, the backpack heavy in my lap. When I walked in, he was waiting. Sharp, no nonsense, with the kind of demeanor that could dismantle someone in court without breaking a sweat. I dropped the bag onto his desk and sat down. My jaw clenched so tight it felt like it might crack. He opened the diary, flipping through the pages and photos. His face stayed calm, but the hardening of his eyes told me everything. "David," he said, his voice low, "this isn't just grounds for divorce. This is criminal. Commercial espionage, exploitation, potentially blackmail. This could get very messy." I didn't hesitate. Do whatever needs to be done. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. I want her out of my life. He nodded. "Prepare yourself. This won't be quick or clean, but I'll make sure you come out on top." The house was dark when I returned, the air still carrying the faint smell of attic dust. I poured a glass of whiskey, but it sat untouched on the table in front of me. Hours passed before I heard Kate's car pull into home. The front door opened, and the stage was set for what came next. She stepped inside, a small rolling suitcase trailing behind her, her voice light and cheerful. "Hey, my love," she called out. But then she saw me, standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, the worn backpack sitting like a dark omen on the coffee table. Her smile faded immediately. "What's wrong?" I didn't mince words. "We're done, Kate," I said coldly. "I'm filing for divorce." Her face turned pale, and her expression shifted rapidly. Confusion, anger, then fear. "What? Why? What are you talking about?" "I know everything," I said, my voice low but unyielding. "The diary, the photos, the videos, the schedule. Hell, even the fact that I'm last on your goddamn list." She staggered back a step, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words to explain, to defend herself. But nothing came. "Get out of my house," I said, pointing toward the door. "Now." She started to argue, her voice rising into frantic, disconnected bursts. "Please, just listen. Let me explain." But I wasn't listening. I grabbed her arm and steered her toward the door, ignoring her protests. She stumbled on the threshold as I shoved her outside. "David, please," she shouted, pounding her fists against the closed door. I turned away, leaving her cries behind me. My footsteps felt heavy as I climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the house now eerily quiet. Her suitcase sat at the bottom of the staircase, but I ignored it. I went straight to the bedroom and began pulling her belongings from every corner of the space we had once shared. Her clothes from the closet, her makeup from the vanity, her books, trinkets, and framed photos from the nightstand. Bag after bag, I filled them with her things. One by one, I carried the bags to the bedroom window and tossed them out. Dresses fluttered to the ground like broken kites. Shoes hit the lawn with dull thuds. Papers scattered across the grass like dead leaves caught in the wind. Below, Kate stood amidst the wreckage, mascara streaking her tear-stained face. She wasn't shouting anymore. She wasn't moving. She just stood there, a broken silhouette against the night. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me from my thoughts. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from my lawyer. "The case has been accepted for review. Be prepared for the next steps. This will be a long road." The divorce wasn't just a legal process. It was a war. Fought in courtrooms, through stacks of evidence, and in meetings filled with icy glares and sharp words. Kate had hired one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the business, a polished predator in a tailored suit who could twist facts until they no longer resembled reality. But I wasn't walking into this unarmed. My lawyer, a seasoned veteran of countless courtroom battles, had built an ironclad case. We weren't just aiming to win. We were aiming to leave Kate with nothing. The first strike came swiftly. Using the documents I had found in the attic, my lawyer uncovered years of financial misconduct. Kate had been siphoning money from our joint accounts into shell accounts and paying private individuals who had no connection to our marriage. The sums were staggering. When her attorney argued these were routine household expenses, my lawyer presented bank statements proving I had been locked out of those accounts for over a year. Then came the bombshell. One of Kate's transfers, a significant sum, had gone directly to her attorney before the divorce proceedings even began. The courtroom went silent as my lawyer laid out the evidence. Even the judge took a moment before reprimanding Kate's attorney for what was, at best, unethical and, at worst, illegal. Finances were just the tip of the iceberg. The diary, the photos, the videos. Each was presented in court, painting a damning picture of Kate's double life. My lawyer kept the narrative clear. This wasn't just betrayal, it was exploitation. Kate's attorney tried to argue invasion of privacy, but my lawyer was ready. These materials were found in their shared home, hidden intentionally in a space legally accessible to both parties, he stated confidently. That argument was dead on arrival. Then came the witnesses. One of Kate's clients, whose name was listed in her diary, took the stand. Under oath, he admitted to paying her for explicit content and described their interactions as transactional and deliberate. It wasn't a misunderstanding or misplaced generosity. It was business. By this point, Kate's polished facade had begun to crack. My lawyer brought in a forensic auditor who had spent weeks untangling Kate's finances. What they uncovered was staggering. Fake contracts, offshore accounts, and funds funneled under the guise of business expenses. A former colleague of Kate's testified that she had asked him to sign documents he didn't fully understand. The evidence piled up, another nail in the coffin of her credibility. When her lawyer argued for equal rights to our assets, my attorney calmly presented records showing that most of what we owned, the house, the car, our investments, had been purchased with funds I inherited from my parents. According to inheritance law, unless those funds were intentionally commingled, they remained solely mine. Kate's attorney scrambled for a counterargument, but came up empty. The turning point came when my lawyer presented evidence of a significant withdrawal Kate had made just weeks before filing for divorce. The amount, combined with the timing, painted a damning picture of someone preparing to flee with as much cash as possible. But Kate didn't go down quietly. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, she played the victim, accusing me of abuse and control. She even produced photos of bruises, claiming they were my doing. For a moment, the courtroom fell silent. Then my lawyer calmly presented medical records showing the injuries predated our marriage. Text messages revealed Kate had bragged about using the same photos in past relationships to manipulate her partners. The final blow came from an unexpected source, one of Kate's former lovers, who testified she had shown him the same bruises years earlier and told him the same lies. The facade crumbled. The judge didn't mince words in the final ruling. The behavior exhibited by Mrs. Kate is not only morally reprehensible but criminal in nature. This court cannot, in good conscience, allow her to benefit from these actions. The house, the car, the savings accounts, all were awarded to me. Kate was ordered to pay fines for financial fraud, cover my legal fees, and forfeit her share of our remaining assets. I sat in the courtroom, the judge's words washing over me. Kate sat just a few feet away, her head bowed and her face pale. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. As the final gavel fell, it felt like the end of a book. A chapter of lies, betrayal, and humiliation closed for good. Outside the courthouse, my lawyer shook my hand. "You won, David. Decisively. It's over." I stood on the courthouse steps, taking in the crisp afternoon air. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months felt lighter now, and the knot in my stomach was slowly loosening. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't tethered by lies or betrayal. Kate had played her hand, and she'd lost. I'd walked away with everything, my home, my finances, and most importantly, my freedom. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was mine to walk. I stayed there for a moment, letting the hum of the city wash over me. Cars passed in a steady rhythm, people bustled along the sidewalks, and life went on as if the events of the last few months hadn't just flipped my world upside down. It was strange how the world didn't stop, even when yours felt like it had shattered. A voice broke my thoughts. David. I turned to see James and Liam waiting by the parking lot. James, as steady as always, gave me a nod of quiet approval. Liam, ever the firebrand, smirked. "How does it feel to be the comeback kid?" he asked, clapping me on the shoulder. "It feels surreal," I admitted. "Like I can finally breathe again." James handed me a flask. "To starting over," he said simply. I took a sip of the whiskey, the warmth spreading through my chest as I handed it back. "To starting over," I echoed. The days that followed were a blur of adjustment. The house felt emptier without Kate's presence, but it wasn't the kind of emptiness that lingered in the pit of your stomach. It was more like clearing out a room that had been cluttered for too long, a space waiting to be filled with something new. I started small, cleaning out old drawers, painting over scuffed walls, and rearranging furniture. Each change was a reclamation, a small act of taking back what was mine. One evening, while unpacking a box I'd shoved into a corner during the chaos, I found a photo album. It was from the early days, back when Kate and I were still happy, or at least pretending to be. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, watching memories I no longer recognized play out in glossy snapshots. Vacations, anniversaries, moments that once felt like milestones now felt hollow, like someone else's life entirely. I closed the album and set it aside. It was time to stop looking back. A few weeks later, I found myself in a small coffee shop downtown, flipping through paperwork for a potential new business deal. James and Liam had been encouraging me to take on something fresh, something that didn't tie me to the memories of the past. The door chimed, and I looked up to see a woman walk in. She was carrying a stack of books, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wasn't glamorous or polished had been. She looked real. There was something grounding about her presence, something genuine. She glanced around the room before her eyes landed on me. She smiled politely, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Curiosity. Maybe this was what moving forward felt like. Not diving headfirst into something new, but letting the possibility of something different creep in slowly, naturally. I still have scars from what happened. You don't go through something like that and come out completely unscathed. But scars are just proof that you survived, that you fought through something meant to break you and came out stronger on the other side. Now, it was time to start writing a new one. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let us know in the comments.